Hi everybody. Today is Thursday, December 5th, and our friend Dmitry Orlov is here with us. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
Let's get started, Dmitry, with what's going on in the West Asia and with the case in Syria. Right after the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, something big, in my opinion, popped up in Syria. There was an agreement in 2020 between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. And you see these people who are supported by Turkey are attacking the government in Syria. What's going on in your opinion?
Well, it had to happen at some point because these frozen conflicts eventually thaw out and turn into hot war again. Freezing conflicts is a bad idea. It's a fad that the Americans started in Korea, and they tried it in Syria, and now they're getting ready to try it again in the Ukraine. But it never works because frozen conflicts eventually thaw out. Now, what happened in Syria is that um, this group called HTS, which was before that Al-Nusra, before that Al-Qaeda or ISIS, which are basically American-trained, American-supported terrorists. They decided to go on attack. They got everything they needed from Turkey because Turkey saw an opening for itself in that part of the world, and they were also getting a lot of support from the Ukrainians. You see, there are all these Ukrainians who know that the days of the Ukraine are counted. They're skilled at terrorist operations, which they gained a lot of experience with in the course of the Ukrainian civil war, and they're looking for new career opportunities in Africa and, as it turns out, in Syria. War has changed, so they come in and they come in with drone technology. They come in with various types of internet communications techniques, um, and they they achieved some amount of success, but the point is that the Russians and the Iranians will have none of it and are killing them by the hundred. And the thing is that, even with this new technology, these terrorists are old school terrorists who attack in large numbers and are killed in large numbers because now they're very easy to see. The new rules of war are if the enemy knows where you are, you're dead by definition. And the enemy knows where they are, and therefore they're dead. So the Russians and the Syrians, to some extent, have been flying sorties and doing very successful bombing runs where they're basically producing piles of corpses out of these Idlib gremlins that have been hiding in the Idlib province for almost a decade now. So that's really, what has to happen is that the Syrian army has to has to relearn how to fight based on the Ukrainian experience, because, as I said, war has changed. Um, the tanks, for instance, can't just roll into battle unless they have mesh or grill or something over them so that the drones that try to destroy the tanks explode in the air over the tank as opposed to piercing the armor. They have to have anti-drone technology. They have to have radio warfare equipment. They basically have to get up to snuff, and then they'll be able to clean up the Idlib province. Now the problem is that the Idlib province is being claimed by Erdogan as his little bailiwick and his to defend. So that may draw in the region into a larger conflict. But the point is that neither Russia nor Iran want a war with Turkey. They want that situation to simmer controllably. And so that may mean that once this onslaught is fought off, Idlib will go back to frozen conflict mode. So the only hope is that enough of the Ukrainian militants or terrorists or whatever you want to call them get killed, and that the U.S. is sufficiently weakened by its internal strife that there won't be much of a recurrence. So that's really the best we can hope for.
When you look at the situation, you see Israel is connected with the situation, is just providing everything they can, and they're trying to support these takfiris, HTS as they call it, and Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. And on the other hand, Ukrainians are there training these people and giving them drones or Turkish drones coming from Ukraine. And on the other hand, you see Turkey being part of this. When you look at Turkey talking about if Israel goes to southern Lebanon, we're gonna send our army there to fight Israelis, and right now cooperating with them in Syria. And how, because I think in the eyes of Iranians and Russians, the situation is so critical to how to deal with Erdogan, how to deal with Turkey, because at the end of the day, they have to understand there has to be some sort of trust between these nations to talk, to make some sort of agreement.
Well, look, Turkey has some very important roles to play as far as Russia is concerned. First of all, it's a natural gas transshipment point now that the Ukraine is out of the picture as a pipelineistan, if you will. So Turkey is the big pipelineistan. It will be supplying lots of countries in Central and Eastern Europe with natural gas. It's really important as far as that goes. Secondly, Russia is building a nuclear power in Akuyu, which is going to be a long-term project, 100 years of electric power supplied to Turkey. There are also a lot of trade relations between Russia and Turkey because Turkey is quite effective in circumventing anti-Russian Western sanctions, where Russia can get pretty much anything it wants through Turkey, including dual-use electronics, military civilian electronics that are manufactured in California or someplace like that. So Turkey is very useful to Russia. Iran is very useful to Russia in lots of capacities. You know, we'll run out of time if we talk about that, but it's a very close and intricate relationship. And Syria is a long-term Russian friend, 70 or 80 now years worth of Syrian-Russian friendship, and Russia does not abandon its friends. So Russia must maintain Syria as a sovereign nation. And given all of these ingredients, you just basically turn them, you put them in a meat grinder and turn the crank and see what comes out. And what comes out is going to be not very pretty. But there isn't really any way to understand the situation by considering that all the participants are capable of taking a principled stand. They're not. They're basically going to pick away at the pieces, resist certain at certain points, give in at certain other points, and it's all going to be a big mess.
We had Iranian foreign minister going to Syria, then to Turkey. I know that the relationship between Iran and Turkey is good. They didn't have any sort of problem so far. But when it comes to the region, it seems that Turkey is playing on the part of the United States, on the part of Israelis. Why are they so obsessed with the government in Syria? And how powerful are these people in your opinion? What sort of leverage does these people, these groups and HTS and Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, I don't know all of them, have on the administration in Turkey? Is there any sort of understanding on the part of Russians? Why are they behaving like this?
Oh, there's plenty of understanding. The problem is that if you pick away at this Gordian knot of problems in the north of Syria, you just make it worse most of the time. I mean, look at the fact that Erdogan is quite afraid of the Kurdish organizations that could spontaneously spring up uh, across the border in northern Syria if if there is no Turkish influence and Turkish presence in that region. Um, and on the other hand, a lot of those Kurds are Russian educated and Russian trained and Russian speaking from the old days. And so uh, how do you work that out? How do you chase the Turks out of there if they feel that they're threatened or will be threatened on their own territory as a result of that? So there's a lot of give and take, and that's just one example, but it's a huge subject, and the best that these leaders can do is focus, compartmentalize, and figure out what it is they can achieve at any given point. But then there's the bull in the china shop, which is the United States with its Ukrainian terrorists in tow. And the Ukrainian terrorists are highly motivated because they need basically a new venue, because the Ukraine is not a good venue for them anymore. They keep getting killed. They would much rather be in Syria or in Africa than in Ukraine at this point. So it's an easy sell to tell them to go to Syria. Their chances of survival are a lot better. Of course, they won't be welcome anywhere else in the world. They know that, but they go there and they make a mess. So as usual, the United States is the wild card, the trump card in the game. Nobody knows how it's going to affect things, but it definitely won't make things more peaceful.
Do you see any sort of substantial role of Israel in what's going on in Syria?
Israel just basically to make themselves feel better more than anything else. They keep bombing Syria. They keep telling themselves that they're achieving some kind of a tactical or strategic aim by doing so. That is entirely unclear. Israel has just lost the third war in southern Lebanon in a row. It has lost a lot of armor. It has demoralized its military, and it has an ongoing conflict in Gaza that has eventually, slowly over time, eroded the standing of Israel around the point where Israelis are afraid to go to travel abroad. The Israeli passport, for one reason or another, used to be a fabulous passport as far as traveling, visa-free travel around the world. Well, that's changing. So Israel is really losing ground, and they bomb this or that location in Syria now and again, just to make themselves feel better. I guess it's sort of a consolation bombing, if you will. They can't get very close with their very expensive F-35s. They have to launch missiles from pretty far away. The targeting isn't that good. So they hit something, they hit a gas station and there's a big kaboom and they feel happy about that. It's not something that can change the game. It's just something that happens.
When we look at the situation between Israel and Lebanon, in in my eyes, what has happened, and one of the main reasons of this ceasefire was because Israel was not doing great in southern Lebanon. This was one of the last gifts from the Biden administration to Israelis because they couldn't retreat from southern Lebanon because that was humiliating. They made a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire. They can bomb right now as we talk. They're bombing Syria. They're bombing Lebanon, and they're just doing their job without having their troops on the ground because their troops were taking a lot of casualties. How do you think that is that making sense in your opinion?
Well, it made sense because the Americans have been trying to demonstrate that they can do something in that region, in that conflict. So they forced through a ceasefire in finger quotes because the ceasefire was not um, between the warring sides. It was not between and Hezbollah. It was between Israel and the government of Lebanon. The government of Lebanon was not party to the conflict. It was just getting its high-rise buildings destroyed, and didn't want that to continue happening because it's sustaining damage. So it was highly motivated to sign whatever paper anybody puts in front of them that would promise to minimize the damage. On the other hand, Israel was highly motivated to sign this piece of paper because if it did, then the Americans would give it more weapons with which to bomb Gaza into rubble and destroy some more high-rise buildings in Beirut. So it was sort of a win-win-win. The Americans look like they negotiated a ceasefire, even though it's fake. The Israelis get more weapons, and the Lebanese might get a bit fewer high-rise buildings destroyed in Beirut. Unfortunately, it wasn't a real ceasefire, so it didn't hold. But I think I predicted that.
Dmitry, when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine right now, do you think that with what's going on with the Trump administration so far, how do they feel in Russia about the Trump administration in 2025? Are they feeling that is there any sort of willing on their part to be trusted on the part of Russians that they want to do something different from the Biden administration?
Well, look, first of all, what Russia wants is victory with a capital V. It wants to win, and it's a couple of months away from winning. It's a tricky situation in some ways. I can get into the technical details of what that would entail, but Russia is winning. Let's basically make sure that everybody understands that Russia is winning. Russia is going to win. Now, Trump has proposed this Mr. Kellogg, Mr. Cornflake, whatever, old as the hills, right? Had a hand in losing the Vietnam War. He's that old. Who came up with I don't know if he wrote this paper or it was partially ghostwritten for him or whatever, on how he would negotiate a ceasefire and freeze the conflict in the Ukraine. And the Russians looked at this thing and laughed because it's just completely ridiculous. I actually printed out some of his stipulations. So he has incentives for Russia, he has incentives for Ukraine, and he has ways of pressuring Russia. And if you actually look at all the stuff, then you start doubting the man's sanity, because he clearly just is in a world of his own. He doesn't know what's going on. So an incentive for Russia is to delay the Ukraine's entry into NATO. Now, why did Russia decide to start this special military operation? Because the Ukraine was threatening to join NATO. So as long as the threat of the Ukraine joining NATO exists, the war is going to continue to its bitter end, which will end in the complete destruction of the state of Ukraine, if you could say that it's still a state. Russia retains currently occupied Ukrainian territories. Okay, we're talking about sovereign territory of the Russian Federation. Where does Mr. Cornflake get off telling Russia what is or is not its territory? That really throws the Russians for a loop. Who does he think he is, to tell the Russians what's their land? Just completely ridiculous. He's insane. A partial lifting of sanctions against Russia. He thinks that that's an incentive. Russians love sanctions. It gives them an internal reasons to drive forth with their very impressive import replacement programs to a point where they're now more or less industrially independent from all hostile nations. And they like it that way. Lifting the sanctions would decrease the pressure on their own businessmen to do their job and pursue these government mandated programs of import replacement. The Russian economy is doing better under sanctions than it did without sanctions. More sanctions, please, not less. Mr. Kellogg, are you listening? Russia wants more sanctions, not less. You could threaten Russia by threatening to take away the sanctions, not the other way around. And the prospect of full sanctions relief and normalization of relations with the US. Okay, the Russians at this point know that the US is the enemy. Why would Russia want to normalize relations with its enemy? Russia wants to win. Russia wants the United States to be defeated. Okay, very important to understand. And then he has some points about applying pressure on Moscow, military support of Ukraine from the United States. That's not pressure on Moscow. Moscow loves that because it gives them more shit to more stuff to destroy, and to strip the U.S. of its weapons stockpiles. That weakens the U.S. It doesn't weaken Russia. And Ukraine receiving long-term security guarantees, bilateral from the United States. That's also something that he offered. Okay, the United States is not in a position now, given that Russia has won the arms race with its new weapon systems, is not in a position to offer security guarantees to anyone, including itself. Tomorrow, Russia could destroy the Pentagon with non-nuclear weapons, and the US would just suck it up, sit there and do nothing. So given that that's the situation now, how can the United States promise or provide security, long-term security guarantees, long-term, to the Ukraine, which is only going to exist for a few more months, as far as I can tell? And then there are incentives for Ukraine, as if the Ukraine is some kind of an independent agency that doesn't just do what it's told by the State Department and the Pentagon. Ukraine would not have to formally recognize Russia's annexations of former Ukrainian territory, but Russia doesn't formally recognize the Ukraine. So how does that go? And also, how does that change? So a government you don't recognize doesn't recognize you. Nobody recognizes anyone. That's great. Okay, that's pleasant, I suppose. No other restrictions on Ukrainian sovereignty. Now that made the Russians really laugh because the Ukraine has no sovereignty. It's basically a US colony at this point. Its entire government is supported by transfer payments, direct transfer payments from the United States. Lots of dollars being flown in. Kiev continues to receive US military assistance in the form of interest-free loans. How is an interest-free loan different from just a handout if it's a government that isn't going to be in a position to repay those loans? I don't know. Tariffs would be placed on Russian energy exports. Now, that's an interesting thing. You see, there's this product called Mazut 100 that Russia sells to the United States. The Americans hate any mention of that, but without Mazut 100, the Americans would not be able to make diesel out of their fracked oil because it's too light. And Mazut 100 is this viscous substance. It's like a gum almost. So they've mixed their super light cracked oil with this sludge that the Russians sell them. It's a high-tech sludge. And the result is diesel. Now, keep in mind that freight railroads in the US are not electrified. 1% of the railroad track in the United States is electrified. The rest runs on diesel. All of the rest of freight within the United States is using diesel trucks. So if the United States cannot make diesel the United States ceases to exist as an industrial country. And it only continues to exist now that it's wrecked its relationship with Venezuela, thanks to this Russian substance that the Russians, out of the goodness of their hearts, sell to the Americans. And all the Americans have to do, if Mr. Cornflake decides to impose sanctions on Russian energy products, is basically say, okay, no more Mazout 100. So does he know what's going on? No, he doesn't. And okay, so I think I answered the question.
You believe that all of things that you've said, together with, we've learned that Jake Sullivan is talking about that by the mid of January, they're going to send more weapons to Ukraine. And Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken yesterday said $50 billion from Russian frozen assets would be in the coming weeks, they're going to send to Ukraine. On the other hand, the conflict in Syria, as you know, they don't have any sort of chance against the government in Syria. They know that. And because the region has changed. You look Syria and the way that even Arab states, Saudi Arabia, pardon me, Saudi Arabia, UAE, these countries were supporting the United States. Right now, they're not that naive to be part of that plan. It seems in my opinion, most of what's going on in Syria is related to the conflict in Ukraine. They want to distract Russia from what's going on or maybe put some sort of pressure on Russians. And they make some sort of distraction in Syria, and right now in Ukraine, trying to help Ukrainian to put them in a better position in the way that Keith Kellogg is talking about, that Biden administration can put Donald Trump in a better position. How is that going to work for them, in your opinion?
I don't think so. First of all, the Ukraine is fractured and falling apart on the inside. So shipping in weapons to the Ukraine right now runs a very high risk of the Russians finding out where they are and destroying them at the dock, right when they get there, because the number of Ukrainian informants who are on Telegram or whatever to the Russians, telling them where the targets are, is getting, the list is getting really long. So getting the weapons to the front is a big problem at this point. They all get blown up at the dock. Recently, a whole bunch of ATACMS and Storm Shadows got blown up at the dock. It was spectacular. Second problem is that the Ukrainians are pretty much running out of troops at the front. The latest statistics is that for every 100 recruits, 10 make it to the front. The rest, for one reason or another, cannot be sent to the front. They get panic attacks, or they can't shoot straight, or they have medical problems, or they run away. And then when they do deliver troops to the front, out of every 10, something like 3 wander away or go and sign up to fight on the Russian side. That's a new trend. Lots of Ukrainian troops are crossing over and saying, "We're on the wrong side. Give us some more ammo, and we'll just turn around and kill those bastards who sent us here." So that's going on a lot. So helping the Ukrainians at this point is becoming an imponderable for the Americans. So the only thing they can continue to do is shoveling money at their own military-industrial complex. That they know how to do that, and that's the whole point of it. Whether the weapons that are produced as a result get destroyed at the dock doesn't really matter, as long as the military contractors get paid. But it's not going to achieve any sort of a significant result on the ground in the Ukraine. But the most important thing that's going on inside the Ukraine is that the Russians are solving this very intricate puzzle: how to shut down Ukrainian nuclear power plants controllably without bombing them. So what you have to do is you have to carefully pick away at the power grid, blowing up transformer farms until you reach a situation where the nuclear power plant operators are forced to go into cold shutdown. But there's a thing that has to be maintained. Even in cold shutdown, these plants have to be supplied with electricity. So how do you deprive them uh, of maintaining an electrical load while supplying them with electricity if the only way that the Ukrainians have of supplying themselves with electricity is through electricity imports? So the Russians from the surrounding EU countries. So the Russians seem to have determined that the way you do this is you basically destroy power distribution to a point where the only thing the Ukrainians continue to do is buy electricity from surrounding countries, which is in limited supply. But that would be enough to keep their nuclear reactors uh, cool once they go into cold shutdown or hot shut. Well, it can't be cold for a while because they're too radioactive. So they're working away at that, and the end result of that is that the Ukraine will have no electricity in midwinter. Huge country with no electric grid. So that should really push the Ukrainian government, what remains of it, deep into their bunkers, because the people won't be that happy with the government at that point. And that would be pretty close to the end of the whole Ukrainian experiment, which has lasted, 35 years now. It's about time to call it quits. May happen this winter.
In your opinion, are we gonna have some sort of sanity in the United States under Donald Trump when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine and in the Middle East, or the things gonna get worse?
Um, my guess is that Donald Trump is going to run into this amount of internal friction within the United States. And all that he will be able to do internationally is to make loud and incoherent pronouncements of various kinds that may make things worse for a short period of time, but will not really result in any major change, except maybe destroy whatever remaining power or authority the United States has internationally. I don't think that he will be able to put together any kind of a cogent plan. I don't even think that he'll be able to negotiate some kind of an orderly retreat. I think it's just going to be chaotic. What's happening now in Washington is that the Democrats have decided, and the deep state have decided, that attacking Trump is not going to work for them because it hasn't worked so far. Because he's a popular public figure, and they're not going to make themselves popular by attacking him. So they attack his political appointees, and they have had some success by manufacturing fake stories about them, their various proclivities, their drunkenness, their philandering, etc. In the case of one of them. And so if those are the opening salvos in a long war that's going to last throughout Trump's term, where he's going to have a lot of trouble getting his appointees into office. Once they get into office, they will have to, sharpen some pencils, whatever, make sure they have some notepads. That'll take them a little bit of time. And by then there will probably be some kind of an organization built up around them that will thwart their every effort to get anything done. So I expect Trump's government to be one of the most ineffectual governments in the world, internally conflicted, constantly at odds within itself, and not really able to make policy or to enforce policy.
Even Donald Trump himself doesn't seem to be helpful, because to be helpful to his administration, the way that he's talking about the countries who are not willing to use the US dollar. and he's threatening these countries to put more sanctions and tariffs. How is that going to be a solution, in your opinion, in his mind?
Well, that's easy. He said that BRICS shouldn't make their own currency, and the BRICS are like, okay, we won't make our own currency. We'll just use our own national currencies. End of story, right? So what this shows is that Trump is really vague on the concept. Nobody wants to replace the US dollar. God forbid. Who would want that? Not even the Chinese with the yuan want to play that game. What people instead want to do is create these financial wormholes that go from one country to another, where you want to buy something from Russia, you pay this wormhole in yuan, and on the other side, it magically transforms itself into rubles, and everything is frictionless, and there are no commissions charged on currency exchange, and nobody has to actually print the money because it's all virtual. It's just numbers, and it all just washes out. It's just accounting games. So that's where BRICS is going. They're not going in the direction of currency. Currency is coin or paper or something like that. Nobody uses that anymore. It's all virtual. It's all based on crypto, and that's how it's going to be. So the point is that Trump won't even know how these countries are trading, and apparently none of his advisors know that either. They don't realize that China and Russia don't use the US dollar and trade with each other, and Russia is the biggest supplier of natural gas and oil to China at this point. Huge market, but doesn't touch the US dollar in any way, shape, or form. He doesn't know that.
How about Olaf Scholz's visit to Kiev, Dmitry? How did you find it, and what was the main reason of this visit, in your opinion?
That was his Catch Me If You Can tour. He came with this big silver suitcase. And it's like, in your face, bastards! I know what you're doing. You go to Kiev, you get your luggage stuffed with Ben Franklin's, and you go back, and you transport all this American money back home and your diplomatic baggage. I know what you're doing. I'm going to do it right in your face. I'm going to hand carry this stuff. And it's probably his swan song. This is it for him, quite likely, given the politics and inside inside Germany, where everybody is sort of like, oh, we love the fact that there's a war going on in the Ukraine, because it gives us something to talk about, rather than the fact that our auto industry has collapsed. They don't want to talk about that. No, the war in the Ukraine is so much more important. Plus, we get to go to Kiev and get suitcases of money. So that was basically the whole trip. He went there, he got his money, he went back, he did it directly and, in front of cameras, because what are they going to do? If everybody does it, then who's going to get charged? There's nobody left who isn't corrupt. Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, did it, so who's left? Nobody. And that's why he did that, because there's nobody left to corrupt.
And how about France right now? How do you see the situation in France? It seems that the government is just so shaky right now. But we know how much this government is supporting the case of the policies in Ukraine. Is it going to be, let's put it that way, is the Donald Trump's presidency going to change the Europe's policy in Ukraine?
Well, I don't think that France has much of a policy as far as the Ukraine. I haven't kept track of the silly tanks, the wheeled tanks that they were going to send. Did they send them or not? I should really look that up. That was the last thing that they could do. They threatened to send troops, which would be really funny. There was a comedy show in Britain, Monty Python, um, and they invented this wonderful French thing called le marche futile, the futile march, which would be the wonderful new military advance of the French military. So if Macron decides to send French troops to the Ukraine, that would be an example of le marche futile. But he's not going to, because what he's really playing at still is his great concept called ambiguïté stratégique, strategic ambiguity. He, for some reason, just loves it and maintains it for all it's worth, but it doesn't add up to anything. As far as the French government, I didn't check this morning's news. Does it still exist? I think they all resigned. It's very hard to keep track of these puppets resigning. The Korean government resigned. The French government resigned almost on the same day, I think. Who's next?
You've mentioned the Korean government, Dmitry. In your opinion, uh, what's going on in Korea right now is related to the leverage that the United States has in that country, or something more internal than external?
Leverage. South Korea is a U.S. colony. Its government is strictly for show and self-enrichment. Its government exists for the sake of corruption, nothing else. That's why all of South Korean presidents end up committing suicide or in jail, because the pressure to pursue various types of corruption is just irresistible for them. If it wasn't for corruption, they'd have nothing at all to do. South Korea is run from a U.S. Army base outside of Seoul, and from the U.S. Embassy. All the major corporations have some degree, sometimes very large degree of American management in them. It's not a sovereign nation by any stretch of the imagination. It's an occupied territory. It has no sovereignty at all, and it's dying. The birth rate per woman in South Korea is something like 0.6 per woman. So that means that with each next generation, the cohort shrinks by 40%. After a while, a country like that ceases to exist, and it's ethnically homogenous. There's no immigration to South Korea. So it really is going to empty out. Eventually, North Koreans will just basically, kick over the border, and because there'll be nobody in the South, nobody left except some old people who will probably expect some humanitarian aid. But that'll be the end of South Korea, and before that happens, it'll probably be the end of American colonial rule in South Korea. But this birth rate is really, that's the telling statistic about the whole thing. The place is going away. And what that tells me is that Koreans don't breed well in captivity, like many animals. They basically just slowly go extinct.
Dimitri, when you look at the situation right now in the United States and Donald Trump coming to power, do you think that is he going to be able to put some sort of division between Iran, Russia, and China? Because right now, in my opinion, the main concern for Donald Trump himself and his administration would be China. And how are they gonna deal with that? Are we gonna see more conflicts, or is gonna make some sort of peace in the Middle East, in Ukraine, then go after China?
Well, what he proposed as far as China so far is tariffs. Now you have to understand that there is no mechanism of replacing Chinese production with American production. That at this point is not really a good business plan because of costs. It costs more to produce a unit of anything in the United States than in China for a number of reasons. Now, what imposing tariffs on China will do, it is drive up inflation in the United States and possibly cause shortages. That is the only thing that will happen. It will also not have much of an effect on China because, first of all, China has this ability to build factories, as it has already done in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and in Thailand, anywhere it wants to. So the United States, in confronting China using tariffs, would be forced to play this silly whack-a-mole game where it has to put tariffs on all kinds of countries, including countries that are supposedly its friends or allies. So there's no reason for instance, there's no reason why Turkey wouldn't be able to make these fake companies that basically relabel Chinese-made stuff as Turkish-made stuff and sell it to the United States. Now it would take the United States with its bureaucracy maybe half a year to catch up to that scheme, and then Turkey gets replaced with Egypt or something, and the game continues. This is not something that is a valid strategy. Imposing tariffs on production that you cannot yourself make at competitive prices is not really a war against your trade opponent, if you will. It's a war against yourself. So in fighting China, Trump will fight the American consumer.
That's why I do believe that we're gonna have we may have some sort of military confrontation between the United States and China in Taiwan, because as you've mentioned, economically they're not capable of they can put some sort of pressure on China, but it's not this is not going to be a substantial deal for China because China knows how to play the game. But in the United States, I do believe that they're clueless about what's going on. How do you
Well,
see the possibility of that?
uh, I think that there will be a lot of posturing going on. And I think from Trump's point of view, it's more important to look like he's fighting a war than actually fighting a war. So there'll be a lot of shadow boxing with China, but it'll be tacitly agreed beforehand that it won't come to any actual blows, because the United States at this point is unlikely to be able to sustain the high level of humiliation that would result from it being defeated by China. We know about the state of the U.S. military and the U.S. Navy, especially. It's ships colliding in the night. We know the amount of disarray that will result from Trump's policies of getting all of the transgenders out of the U.S. military. We from that we can surmise that the U.S. is not going to be too eager to get involved in a large hot conflict with a major peer adversary, having having seen how badly the situation has gone with its proxy conflict in the Ukraine, where it was, and is still refusing to enter the fray directly, wisely so. It has no proxies to throw at China. Japan doesn't count. South Korea doesn't count. Who's left? Nobody. And so I don't think much is going to happen, but there is going to be tension, because that plays well on American TV. There will be some shots fired in some direction of there being no targets that way. And everybody will just sort of go harumph, and nothing much will happen.
How do you see the possibility of the continuation of the conflict even under Donald Trump because of the terms that, as you've mentioned earlier, they don't make sense? And that's why many people are now thinking that maybe under Donald Trump, they're not going to be able to put an end to the conflict, just continuing the deep state prevail and continue this conflict. For as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't leave; they just continue until nobody else is capable of fighting. Right now, they're talking about reducing the draft age from 25 to 18, which is, we know, is devastating. They're literally destroying a country. All of these young people, young men. How do you see in that direction? Is that possible?
Well, there won't be any 18-year-olds to draft because they're all heading for the border right now. You see, if you're under 18, you can leave. So everybody who's under 18 is leaving. So basically, the number of people that will be able to draft is dwindling, and the rest of the 18-year-olds and 18 plus will probably go into hiding. Um, it will be very difficult to draft them. As I said, out of every 100 people that they round up, only 10 actually get to the front and can be stuck in a ditch somewhere to where they're supposed to shoot back and defend it and get killed. And out of those 10, maybe 3 will desert, and maybe one will cross over to the Russian side and fight for the Russians. So this is not a situation where you can win. The entire Ukrainian military is rapidly hollowing out, and it's really just collapsing. Russia is gaining ground by leaps and bounds. At some point, there will be no resistance at all over large stretches of the front, and the front is 1,000 kilometers. And the Ukrainians will simply evaporate. They'll run. There'll be no way to stop them. Right now, the only thing that's driving them towards the front is the threat of being killed by their own side. So there are the troops that are fighting the Russians, and then there are Ukrainian troops fighting the Ukrainians as they try to retreat. That's their battle order at this point. But at some point, even that will stop working. We may be months away from that basically collapsing altogether. So what can the United States do at that point, other than what it did in Afghanistan, which is leave and pretend that the problem doesn't exist? How many news stories about Afghanistan do you see in American press right now? Zero. Afghanistan doesn't exist. So my prediction is a year from now, the Ukraine will no longer be in the news in the United States.
Yeah. Just to wrap up this session, Dmitry, if you were to mention the name of countries who are still willing, in the European countries, who are still willing to continue the conflict in Ukraine, how do you see that? Do you think that France wants to continue this conflict? I do believe that Germans are so tired of this, but the pressure coming from Washington is tremendous. They cannot sustain that pressure. That's why they're doing what they're doing right now. But how about the other countries? How even Germany?
Well, the big problem is lack of sovereignty. These countries do not have the ability to formulate their own foreign policy. They pretend to, for the purpose of public relations, for the purpose of pretending to their own people that their government is in charge. So they say different things at different times, but basically they're they're biding for time because at the end they know that they will do exactly what Washington tells them to do every time. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that a lot of Western politicians love the fact that there's this war in Europe because they can talk about that instead of talking about their own collapsing economies, which have all seen better days. You know, they all peaked. Every single European economy peaked over a decade ago. Some as far back as 2008. That's the case in Germany. A lot of them have collapsed by a quarter or more. Italy has collapsed by close to a third by now. They're shadows of their former selves. And people know that because their standard of living is steadily dropping. And so their governments would dearly love to have something else to talk about, something other than political, than economic collapse, because that way lies political collapse. And so having a war inside Europe is a blessing for them. And the longer it goes on, the better it is for them.
How about the United Kingdom? How do you feel about them? Because the situation in the United Kingdom, it seems to me, is totally different from what we're witnessing in Germany.
Well, the United Kingdom is in a race um, as to how big an idiot they can get into the prime ministership. They've experimented with people like Liz Truss. Each next one is worse than the previous one, just more diluted, more strange, more nonsensical. Eventually, they will have to, basically say that Larry the cat that lives at 10 Downing Street is the prime minister and leave it at that for as long as that cat lives, because he'll make more sense than any of the other candidates. But basically, what they want to do is they want to stay relevant to their master in Washington somehow. And they're failing at that in spectacular ways by supporting Biden. And now they have to rotate by 180 degrees and support Trump. And it's awkward. It's very, very awkward. And they really don't know what it is they have to do. But the fact is that something like half the Britons can't afford to heat their houses this winter. And again, that's the situation that they ought to talk about because that's a national emergency. And what do they do instead? They talk about the Ukraine, of course.
How do you see the future of Zelensky? Is he going to stay at the end of the conflict, whatever would be that end? Is he going to stay in Ukraine or he's gonna go somewhere else?
I will answer that question through a bit of pantomime.
By Ukrainians?
By himself. He has a very nice pistol for it, gifted to him by the Czech government.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dmitry, for being with us today. Great
Thank
pleasure,
you.
as always.